So welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Parker X, and we're hanging out with Brett Galvin again, and we're just gonna get right into it and just talk about what we can talk about and what we think this thing looks like coming out the other side. Brett, I think you have a nice little PowerPoint list of topics there we're gonna jump into. You want to put that up, or?
Yeah. So this week, welcome from the future again.
Yeah.
We're talking about as a service this week and what that looks like and how we can deploy it and what makes sense for operators and for asset owners and facility managers, and when to deploy it, what it looks like, what options you have, what are the upsides and downsides. I think it'll be an interesting conversation. Let's dive right in.
Absolutely. I love the idea, and I think your business does have to get used to not getting as much capital up front, and that sort of thing if you're going to be on the providing these services and this hardware and all these different things. But I think if you can migrate your business that way, first off, I think you have to. If you don't, you're going to get left behind at some point. You must be able to offer this. But I do think some companies will have a hard time transitioning. They're used to that big project revenue coming in, and they're not going to have that in this sort of environment.
True. I think it becomes even more interesting now. Also, companies who traditionally may have needed to carry a whole raft of technicians in the field, that becomes a little less economical potentially these days. You can certainly, if you can centralize the system to a data center and have the smarts in a central location, then from the company's point of view, the supplier's point of view, it makes a lot more sense that way.
When you can host those services and rent kind of those resources, essentially, you're renting processing power and database storage capacity, but and the environment which your servers and database and all that stuff needs to live in. What also happens, though, is all those technicians that work inside those data centers, they're very well leveraged from, they have the operational leverage they have, the data center has over those technicians is immense because there's hundreds of servers there, and they got one guy that just can work on a lot of different things at once, and he's not driving around in a truck like we used to kind of in the old days because somebody's server wouldn't restart. So now, as an owner, you don't have to wait for the technician to show up that knows how to work on the server, and as a provider, you don't have to send your technicians out all over the place. It's just that whole aspect of what you're having to worry about, both customer and provider standpoint, it's just handled. It's outsourced, it's handled, it's being done way less expensive than it could be any other way, and most times it performs better as well, as long as the system you're using is designed to work in that environment.
Yeah, look, where parking is really a technology follower, and we've seen this for a decade or more.
Yeah.
These as a service type models, starting to see projects as a service now, not just the sort of software as a service. There's a layer of technology that's always been on a annual license type basis or a consumption basis. I'm thinking the revenue systems, the reservation systems, those types of things have been around. I think our discussion is around the infrastructure that's in the field and how that can be deployed as a service, so you can pick it up, take it, move it, access it, expand more quickly. There's an uptime element to it as well, and you touched on it then, where you're able to get the right talent to access the system and fix it, and maintain it and monitor it a lot more easily in an as-a-service environment or a hosted environment, versus you might have someone who goes to the site, doesn't know what to do with the system, doesn't know how to fix it, pulls it out, downs your system, takes it to someone who does know how to fix it, waits for them to be ready, and then redeploys it. That whole cycle, theoretically, and practically, is reduced under an as a service, and the elements that are in the cloud as well.
Well, look, just obviously with the environment that we've found ourselves in at this moment, having fewer people showing up at your facility is a positive thing, especially someone who's as transient as a technician.
Hey
is,
Lester, there's some
going from
background
place to
noise in
place and
your
all over on a
in the
regular
feed,
basis.
mate.
I mean, he's probably one of the most least desirable people to have inside your facility, and if you don't have to have that extra touch point with someone who's had so much contact, then I think that's a big win.
Yeah, there's definitely some upsides. There's some things that really make no difference, and then there's some downsides to the Nav service model as well. So we should talk through that. And obviously, it's not for every facility. It's not for certain balance sheets. They prefer to have things that nest and own an asset. But if you're looking at the entire suite, there's certainly some. And particularly in this point in time, there's some verticals and some players in this industry, management groups, operators, that really need to start thinking about how they adopt this as their default.
Well, I think
way to procure.
Yeah, I mean, and I think people have become a lot more precious about their cash right now. So if you can easily pivot to this sort of a model, then I think you're in really good shape. You have to. You just have to. There's so many reasons why you should have done it already, and now there's just 10 more reasons why you have to do it today.
So classically, it's perfect for an operator who has a short or a fixed term lease, and they're trying to marry the deployment of the system and the project against the fixed term that they're involved in, or where they can make a lease arrangement where they can really multiply their cash flow, start to earn straight away without sinking funds. The other area where this plays well right now is where there's either a chance for rapid expansion, where other businesses have fallen over, or their business isn't viable anymore to a point where they can deliver service and they're failing their client set, and you can be prepared to sweep in and pick that up. So opportunity seeking. And then the other side is if you or your facility or site needs to change configuration rapidly where the funds aren't available. I'm thinking about shopping centres, potentially some off-airport car park locations, things like that really need to come out of this in a completely different way than they went in. And so, as a service model, a low money down, suck it and see approach really does favour those verticals.
Yeah, when you start thinking about the discounted cash flow and those sort of things, it really does change things.
So in terms of the downsides, let's flip through them quickly, and then we'll talk about some of the things that are more positive. But
yeah,
the downsides, generally when you're buying an as-a-service, the contracts are much more standardized in terms of the standard of service that you can expect. So you may find that the control you have to negotiate, to pivot, at least in the initial sense, to get something that's completely customized to you, might be traded off here in a way that might otherwise, there might be a little bit more freedom. So have a look at that.
You're right though, because I tell you, when you're starting to offer something like this that's more standardized like it, you really kind of need your services to be standardized. That way you don't have, you get into a point where you've got, every time a service, somebody who's looking to service that account, they have no idea without reading the actual contract, understanding what they actually have in their account. So you really do need to package it in a manner that you can go, okay, I've got service level A, B, C, or D. I know what they get based on that. That's a perfect world.
It's a sensible approach from all sides to really understand what you're getting over the term. Traditionally, service levels or service after a purchase has been something that we'll worry about that when we get there. But that really front ends that conversation, and I think the suppliers have been strong on understanding what as a service means to them to make a profit for them, and so there's a sort of a level of feedback that you need to understand and really get involved in what you're going to get over what term, And so it does make it a little more complex. There is some cost creep potentially as well. There's risk on the vendor's business, and the terms can change. So unforeseen things come up. What you're doing is you're relying absolutely on the supplier's business being rock solid for the term and not falling away. You're certainly setting yourself up to, I guess, in the same way as you are completely reliant on that business being strong in their operations, because all of your assets and all of your assets nest inside their own. So you're renting those assets. You need to make sure their policies, procedures are all firmed in the same way as if it was your own, but you're relying on them to manage them. So there is a bit of a risk there.
Something I've been asked for recently that I've never been asked for before was a copy of our privacy policy.
Yeah.
And that's something new in the last 24 months that in all my years prior we had never been asked for that sort of thing, because we're holding people's data now. We have their data now. It's not theirs anymore. They don't own that database anymore, and they're now renting that resource.
I've put cost creep there. There may be another aspect here. Is once you get familiar with this model, and this model becomes the predominant model, the levers to change cost and price, or the price that you pay, are much easier to do than probably traditionally. So as this becomes the dominant form, I guess there will be some more flexibility on cost and price.
I just wonder about like sometimes when you look at some of the pricing from Amazon and Azure and stuff like that, I mean, it's very obvious that I don't know their business model well enough, but it looks like they're all being very aggressive trying to claim as much real estate as possible in this space. And I wonder if we'll see, that's where I think the biggest fear of cost creep will be, is in those areas from the providers, because we're all using the same people. I mean, the independent data centers doing this are got to be a failing business model, I would think. I don't know for certain, but you would think.
Well, the same issues apply in the cloud or in an as-a-service model. Things can be made redundant. They can have a service life that exceeds. They can be obsoleted in the same way. And so those risks are on the intermediary, the business in the parking space, to bear and work through. And that obviously has an impact. That you're somewhat potentially shielded from them within your contract, but those costs are still embedded there. Things do go obsolete, platforms change, requirements change, and that's involved in this as a service model.
So how long of a contract term would you sign up for if you were going to procure a revenue control asset, whether it was on street, off street, or whatever it was doing for you? What term would you want? It seems like 5 years would be a good term.
I think that's practical, in a sense that the configurations are changing quickly. The way parker behaviour is changing quickly. The life cycle of the off-the-shelf type solutions is also around that period as well. So beyond that, you do need to. As a supplier and as a buyer, things are going to start to degrade, so the risk becomes a little bit more stretched. So it's certainly that 5-year window, I think, as a rule of thumb or a thumb in the air. Yeah, that sounds like a good period.
I think with as quickly as things are changing, like you said, I think that's as long as you'd want to be locked into one technology. I mean, you want that off your books by then, completely. I mean, you obviously will appreciate it by then, but if it can be that rental type model, I think that's sort of that HaaS or SaaS-based model. I think that's the way you want to go. Just gives you that opportunity to upgrade again and get into something better, and still have no capex. Just have it all be part of your operational budget.
Yeah, as a buyer, if you have a portfolio, you're buying all the time, so you're certainly going to notice over the course of the 5 years how things are changing, and you might find you want to extend it if the system and the service of the offerers still makes sense, it's still operationally working. You might choose to roll it on. The other aspect is be careful about data access, data ownership. If you choose to migrate away from one supplier to another, and rights to your own data, rights to accessing your own configuration, be sure to consider those factors when you're signing up to these models. I know that some contracts and others aren't. If you get into a conflict, potentially your right to physically go and find your data, migrate your data somewhere else, that mightn't be as easy as potentially just obviously turning off your server and taking it and moving it somewhere else when it's physically in your possession.
That's interesting, right? So what about if somebody finds it in their contract that the company providing that service has the rights to sell their data to Google or whoever to use it for parking availability or parking turns, revenue? There's a million people that'd be interested in it, and if you had enough of these out there, you'd have quite a bit of data on a certain area. Could become really valuable to somebody else other than you, the owner of the data.
Well, even at that, not your data, but maybe the metadata around it. It doesn't necessarily need to be your data. If there's value in that data, you should possess it, you should own it, and you should have access to it over the term, whatever that term is. It's just it's a tweak at the edge. I don't think it's a showstopper, but it's something to think about. The other aspect is self-service. So, you really have within these contracts a tied up service model. You can't as easily self-service, I would imagine. It takes a lot of that. One of the strategies we talked about in one of the former sessions was the ability to have a look at third parties monitoring and maintaining your system. That's really not an option under these types of models that are locked in with service, and there's a reason why you do want to do that.
I think you're almost locked into offering a 5-year plan as part of the whole thing. I think it needs to be all wrapped together, and I think everyone would want it that way. But you're right. If you were planning on going out to third-party providers to try to find service for your equipment, that might not be supported in this environment. And I could see how on the other end as a supplier, you wouldn't want, Joe Public out there just trying to fix your stuff for you. Like you'd want somebody who's going to do it in the most cost-effective way because you own it. It's your stuff.
That's right. That's where the service level conversation really needs to be taken forward. Making sure that you're getting the appropriate service, that the metrics that you desire as an operation of that equipment are being met on a rolling basis, and you're not just letting them slide and sort of taking what service is on offer. Because you don't have options, you really need to have those within the contract, written into the contract, standardized and monitored.
It does seem like a lot of the systems are having fewer and fewer moving parts, right? So this concept of, the last 15 years where you've had these, all this custom hardware, all this, hardware that's it's not commercial off the shelf. It's all been designed. It's all been built. It's all proprietary. That's really slipping away. And now I feel like what's getting traction the most is things that really do have commercial off-the-shelf components in them that, are just swappable. It's not something that's this $12,000 unit that you have to change on the device. It's more of a, hey, we're going to get another Philips printer or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Can be swapped into it. Less ingesting of tickets, less paper tickets in general, more scanners, that sort of thing. That again reduces the need for service.
Absolutely.
And, arguably the hardest part about it, in my opinion, is it also reduces the value that resellers of product can actually provide too. They're getting squeezed in this.
Yeah, absolutely. If if we finally see the death of cash and coin, yeah, absolutely, you'll see both the servicing of the system, cash collection service, all of those aspects of potentially some service models are migrate away. Yeah. Okay. So financially, obviously, there's some limitations. We spoke about that. You're not carrying the asset on your balance sheet. That might be interesting. You're not maybe optimizing some of the tax advantages of doing that. Valuations related to that, but I mean, they're at the margins. I think some of the things that are no difference. So financing of a project for capital payments. It's not a new concept. I guess it's a new approach or a more prominent approach to marketing that X as a concept, as a service concepts have been around for a while. Once you've fully baked things in, obviously depending on the term, the system may well last a lot longer than the term that you've signed up to, but arguably the suppliers of these services have to fully bake in the cost of the system when they're issuing a 5-year term to you. So your system may well operate for 10 years and might have a service life of 10 years. But if you're fully baking in the price of that over 5 years, there's a marginal difference there that you're wearing. Long-term issue with support of obsolete systems and platform. Yeah, I think I touched on that a little earlier. You're still seeing levels of obsolescence of things that are, as a service, you're still facing those challenges, and so there's a tension there to be worked through.
Yeah, like there's always going to be businesses that are, your shorter term buyers too, that are, people that are buying buildings to renovate and then flip. I think you're going to have to figure out, I'm not sure. I'd want to talk to some more owners of that just to figure out what works best for them. Are they able to resell a building where there's this required payment of service has to continue to be paid, or do they need to buy the system outright so that it's in the part of the building and it's not something they have to continue to pay on? I don't know. I think what works best in those environments.
It's true. That'll be up to them, but it's not a new concept for them. These services and these systems and these styles of managing systems are pretty well entrenched now. So people understand the concepts, understand the system. So again, if they want to pivot, there's always an opportunity to change the model, change the structure of that relationship into a way that makes sense for them. But certainly, it's most advantageous for those who are rapidly expanding or need to make a configuration change easily. Migrate. I think I found that without a cash drop.
I've heard of some organizations are doing this with the construction companies where they have to build a new building, they have to put in a park system. They're buying the hardware portion of it, but they're leaving the SaaS. They're happy to have the SaaS part because it lowers their building costs, because now they're not paying for all the software in the system. They're just buying the hardware, and then the rest of it comes in the form of whoever's going to manage the asset has to all of a sudden launch this software and launch the system in place.
Having
really changes the picture.
Exact same conversations I'm having. I had a customer on Thursday, the exact same conversation. What can we do to push this all down the road? And it's a construction company who has something to deliver but doesn't need to concern themselves with how it's going to operate necessarily down the road.
Yeah.
Good conversation, Lester. We went around the block a bit on that, and I appreciated that. Hopefully this is value. It shouldn't be an interest. It shouldn't be a new concept for most, but certainly go out there and if your customers are looking and facing challenges, I'd start to look at this as the preferred way to procure, and then if you can't make that, then come back. Certainly, if your organization's looking for it, it's something that I'm talking about with my customers all the time.
I think you almost have to think about it like it's almost like buying a car picture, right? It's like, how much do you want to put down, and where do you want your payment to end up, or what do you want to have for your operational expense? So I think I'd like to give people the option just to say, okay, here's a sliding scale. Like the more you pay up front, the less you end up paying on the long run. But the less you want to pay up front, the more the monthly is going to be, and it's okay.
It's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And coming along with those leases is a set of obligations that are probably new. So just have a look at those, make sure you're exploring and comparing the as-a-service models between some and the others. Some are quite loose, and obviously others are much more locked down as they're more used to how those arrangements work out.
You know, it's interesting. I still don't see buyers negotiating their ongoing costs in their deals that they're doing.
Okay.
Because obviously, even if you have all this done as a service stuff, someone's still going to come along and run your equipment over at some point. Like invariably, it's going to happen. And they just don't really they haven't, now that your hardware cost and your line item pricing is, in this environment's really become invisible or just irrelevant to you, right? Because now you're just looking at the project as a whole. I'd say make sure you figure out what your replacement costs are going to be if anything occurs and negotiate that.
Yeah, that's key. Certainly something I missed there. We are adding into our contracts a component list, a spares list, a replacement parts list.
Yeah.
So in the case of accidents and damage, you can go and have a look at what you've signed up to on that degree, maybe negotiate that at the outset.
Labor rates, all that. I mean,
yeah, after hours, accident response.
Never a better time to negotiate that stuff than up front.
I 100% agree. If you can have one period of negotiation and conversation where the rules are written for the entire term, that's much better than leaving it to the next guy to do in a couple of years' time and letting him pick it up and fumble it, for sure.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Parker X podcast. We sincerely appreciate it and hope you are enjoying our content. Please remember to rate, review, comment, subscribe, and share. And follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. The following has been a production of Parker X.